Hello, everybody. My name is Curtis Schroeder. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Rethinking SPM, conversations with thought leaders and experts in the sales performance management space to help us rethink our assumptions and to help push us forward in creating high-performing sales teams. Joining me today is John Waldron, Director of Total Rewards and Global Compensation for PepsiCo. John, thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. This will be a lot of fun.
Well, I think it will be. It will be a good conversation. But why don't you start by giving us just a bit of a snapshot into your career path, who you are, your journey in the SPM space, and what you do at Pepsi.
Yeah, so I have 25 plus years kind of in sales ops, and sales compensation. And so for the last 10 years, I've focused exclusively on sales compensation in one of our operating businesses. The last 2.5 years, I've been part of what we call our Global Compensation Center of Expertise. And so I work with all of our different businesses globally in 200 countries, 40 operating business units, and really consulting with them on their sales compensation designs and kind of everything it touches, which, as we all know, is very broad and touches a lot of different teams and work streams.
But with the cultural differences and just the geographic differences, I'll bet that means it's a lot of change from day to day and a lot of nuance even in how you bring that to life.
Yes, and our businesses are very diverse and broad, not only the cultures that we operate in, but we are actually primarily a food company, despite the name PepsiCo. The majority of our revenue is from food. And with the food category, we deal from everything from chips, which we're known for, our Frito-Lay brand, but then we also have a lot of cookie brands, dairy brands, baby food, bakeries. So it gets very broad and very diverse. And so it's why we need somebody like me to consult on all the different sales compensation designs and strategies.
Absolutely. And fun fact, I literally just thought of as you're describing all this, my dad's first job back in the late 70s, early 80s was a driver for Frito-Lay. And so I've heard the stories all about that. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the makeup of the sales force? What does that look like kind of from a global perspective?
Yeah, so we have a lot of what we call a route sales rep. So they are a very fulfillment-based seller, and we've got extremely short sales cycles. So from as little as 15 minutes to 48 hours is usually the maximum. And so very different than somebody who's selling like SaaS and technology and software. So it requires a completely different design as well as completely different administration. We can't use annual timeframes, for our sales comp designs. So we use very short timeframes often, which ramps the intensity level up quite significantly. But essentially our people, our sellers are operating out there on just about every major street in the countries we operate in. And it's very people intensive, but we're out there amongst the customers and the consumers every single day. And, we've got amazing brands, but it is our people and our brands that are out there at the front lines that really make a difference and create a competitive advantage for PepsiCo.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they're the front lines and those front lines are broad and wide and deep, that's likely dependent on a really strong team inside to make sure that the support for those revenue generators and the individuals that are responsible for engaging with your customers are supported and equipped and motivated. So let's dive into this topic of sales performance management at a more broader level. And so everybody talks about SPM, sales performance management. Is it a process? Is it a technology? It drives specific roles inside an organization. So when you think about sales performance management, what does that mean to you and to your team at PepsiCo?
Well, I think it really depends on what you try to tackle with with SPM. And I would say optimally, I want to make SPM kind of the skeletal system of sales compensation, because it really is about operationalizing and enabling what you want to do. Because the design in and of itself is great, but you have to actually be able to pull off that design. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. And yes, the end result is a calculation, and a lot of people can hyper focus on that calculation, but it should be way more, because sales comp to me is way more than pay mix, leverage, and KPIs. Because ultimately what we're trying to create is motivation. And if you think psychologically, the studies will show that the best way to motivate anybody is to generate achievement and recognition. And so everything we do, from a pay mix, leverage, KPIs, and the design, is really about creating achievement and recognition. And it goes beyond just recognition as a financial reward. And so when you think about SPM, it really needs to become that skeletal system that enables us to stand that design up and enable everything that we're wanting to do. And what a more powerful tool for achievement and recognition than something that can consume a ton of data and then calculate and do whatever you want as an output with that data. And yes, calculation is one thing, but you need to have a bigger vision to really maximize the value that you can create with SPM.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I love that analogy of the skeletal system, and I like that distinction of achievement and recognition. And when I think about SPM and the conversations that we've been having, and even just some of the what things that we're seeing moving forward, and that achievement piece, the end of the road almost is the compensation side of it, right? Like, did I actually hit my target? Did I actually deliver on what was expected of me? Am I getting paid for what I hope my performance is reflecting? But the achievement, I'm sure you would agree, is so dependent on a lot of other things that stack up that lead to that sales rep actually being able to deliver and execute on that compensation plan. I think I would imagine in a business that's as broad and diverse as yours as well, is that the designs of how you think about territory and route mapping and those kinds of things, and how salespeople are aligned to the sub geographies of where they're actually responsible for, and the setting of targets that they're actually responsible for, and then clarity around the compensation piece of it, like the interconnectedness of all of those processes, and probably some other ones as well, are really important. Would you agree with that?
Completely. And the more complex and the bigger things get, the more you need to leverage tools to be effective. And when it involves a lot of people and a lot of layers and multiple channels, communication is critical. And ultimately, we're trying to get everybody focused. So if you know what the goal is and you know where you are, it's going to just naturally, as human beings, we're going to think about, okay, how do we get from here where we are to where we need to be and where we want to be? And so the more frequent, the more front of mind that is, the better outcomes that we're going to have. And feedback is truly a gift. And all of that data that exists in SPM, there's a lot of insights and there's a lot of things we need to know. And so in some ways, SPM enables us to curate a lot of those different communications and those different items, and really do it effectively versus calling somebody, emailing something, sending somebody a spreadsheet that they have to apply 5 or 6 filters to see exactly what they need. Let's just give them exactly what they need. Let's just drop it in their laps. And so that's why SPM should go way beyond just the calculation. It should really unlock the potential with the data that's there and what you would optimally and efficiently do, to really deliver your sales strategy.
I want to talk a little bit more about those specifics and what it sounds like you're talking about is seeing the world through the eyes of the salesperson, even to some extent, and how do we help support them in a way that allows them the maximum amount of time to actually do the job we're paying them for, the selling piece of it, right? So, but before we get into maybe some of the more practical pieces of it, I want to tap back into your career and almost look at this trajectory and say, as you look at the last 25 years, what in this world of SPM has changed? What do you feel like maybe it is different or more important today than it's been before? Maybe that even taps into some of the challenges that you feel like sales leaders and the teams that you support and the salespeople that you support are facing. So what do you see as different or more important today?
Yeah. So I would say particularly my last 10 years have been heavily involved with SPM, but prior to that, I was touching a lot of aspects of the things I'm sharing. And, having been a seller, I do still to this day think like a seller. And part of what motivated me to end up in sales compensation, it was a evolution, but I recognized that how much more effective could I be as a seller if I had better communication, better direction, and got caught up or didn't get caught up in too many miscellaneous kind of aspects like, hey, this sales invoice didn't process or didn't credit to me, and having to do those types of things. And it was just like, I've got a million things that I need to put my focus and energy in. I shouldn't be distracted and disrupted by these things. And so that created a passion within me that we really want to enable and empower sales reps with everything we do, and that there's a tremendous amount of value to those behind the scenes sales operation type of roles. But then particularly when I worked my way up in sales and I had sellers reporting to me, the worst thing that you could ever do is mess up their pay, because that was going to be their first priority is, hey, you need to get my pay fixed. And I'm like, well, you need to do all these other things. But it's just like, okay, if I'm not paying you correctly, then we're going to have a disconnect. And this just isn't going to work as designed and as optimal as it should be. And then when you just think about planning and being effective, being efficient in the marketplace, and we do have a very intensive customer service focus orientation in our sales function. And I would say our marketing function is very intensively focused on our consumers. And so we've used the term delighting consumers, delighting customers. And so we really need to position those people that are out there in front of our customers to do that. And if they're distracted and not focused on that, we're doing a disservice to our entire business. And so I see where these things are very real and very relevant.
Well, I know this sounds like it becomes, you have to delight your salespeople so that they can delight your customers, right? There's a domino effect or a chain in there that's part of that. Well, I can tell you are passionate about this topic, which is what makes it fun and exciting to talk about. But as you think about guiding an international team and your role in total rewards and compensation at a global level, how does PepsiCo's focus on SPM extend beyond what we might think of as a traditional or a typical view of sales compensation? That benefits your customers, I'm sure, in a way when, like we're talking about, that domino effect of effectiveness and satisfaction and delighting of the salesperson. But what does that mean for you and your role for the firm and then ultimately to the sellers and customers?
One key area is our sales compensation designs. And essentially a big challenge that every sales compensation professional has is everybody wants to try to make the sales comp plan a silver bullet. and it solved every challenge there is in the sales function. And by doing that, you're eroding any potential for effectiveness of that plan design, and because it's trying to accomplish everything in the kitchen sink. So if we repivot what we're trying to do with what, we can actually kind of create a silver bullet, but we're not trying to do it all with our sales compensation design. We can keep it very focused on the outcomes and the behaviors that we're attempting to drive, but then you can use SPM, and I think SPM is such a great description for it today, because performance management. Now, sales measures a ton of different stuff. And one of the things that we like about sales is it's very objective. Everything's objective. In the other functions, it's a little bit more subjective and quantitative a lot of times, or qualitative a lot of times. But in sales, we're measuring everything, but that doesn't mean we put everything in the sales compensation plan design, but we can performance manage everything. And so using the tools that it has, the calculation capabilities, you can kind of do both of those things hand in hand, and think more holistically against performance, but not try to just use one lever with your sales comp design. And so that's a big factor. But really just being efficient, being effective, as every sales comp practitioner will recognize, data is always a challenge. And so how do you leverage the tool to identify challenges or opportunities with your data as soon as possible, fix them, and really prevent anything that could disrupt what you're trying to do, and really erode that focus that you want to exist everywhere. And I think if you really maximize what you do there, it can make you very proactive, because the challenge for most sales compensation practitioners is they're very reactive. There's a million things that are kind of on fire, and they're breaking the fire hose out and they're shooting it all over the place. But when we're proactive, that's where we can really provide value to our business, because not only are we keeping the sales comp plan accurate and effective, but we can constantly assess the designs. We can do the analysis that we've always wanted to do. We can manage and keep our stakeholders informed on what's going on, and getting more input and more feedback that we can leverage to continue to make ourselves better. And so it really needs to be an unlock that really transforms and revolutionizes things.
I love that. We did a study with the Sales Management Association that we just released last month, and you were talking about this kind of idea of not only just being reactive to change, but also being able to be proactive with it, to anticipate change. And they identified that as kind of the two-headed monster of successful firms, that they, when they were able to both anticipate and reactively implement change effectively, I think it was something like 30% more likely to meet your sales objectives when you have that capability. So an organization that can understand change, can get ahead of change, can be proactive in change, but then also you have the global pandemic hit, you have whatever, international conflict that hits, and you've got to be able to adjust your strategies and adapt. That two-headed monster really is important for organizations to be able to get the most out of their go-to-market planning, and certainly out of their performance management of their sales force. So I know you talked about communication a little bit while ago, and I want to get tactical as we kind of put into the context what it means to be a salesperson and how that effectiveness is enabled. So what kind of strategies have you and your team put in place to look at linking sales performance to the compensation plan, to the designs of your territory structures, the designs of your quotas, the kind of interconnected structure of your go-to-market engine? How have you done that? How have you brought that to life?
Right. Well, I became very passionate about communication because I've been around a while. And so there was a point in time where we would have a weekly sales meeting, and we'd be given a deck, and it was literally tons of papers. And so all of our big customer chains had all kinds of information about what's going on with them. But it also had a lot of reporting, and there was a lot of different little data points that I needed, but it was so random and dispersed through all of this madness of paperwork. And we'd have sales managers tell us, this is your Bible, you need to keep it with you, you need to reference it all the time. And we would do that. But I recognize, man, this should be done so much more efficiently. And so when I became a sales manager, I quickly got my Excel skills even sharper and figured out, okay, how do I access this data? How do I start building? And I built some Excel scorecards that gave everything that everybody needed to know on one page. And that was such a game changer. And so they loved that. And so we started gamifying it a little bit and making it a little bit more fun, because one of the things that really makes some of this stuff work is people want to achieve and they want recognition, but there's kind of a social pressure associated with it. And so if there's some type of scorecard, nobody wants to be last on that scorecard. And nobody wants to be on the lower half of that scorecard. And so even if you know you can't get to the top of that scorecard, you definitely want to be up there a little bit. And so when we started gamifying that, it got highly, highly competitive. And we were giving no tangible rewards for some of it. But it was just the pride and that recognizing that they were achieving. And this became so a game changer for our location. And we had about 80 sellers, that I was touching my territory and my peers' territories. And so we were doing it across all of them. And then it was like, hey, can we get this every single day? Not once a week. Can we get this every single day? And I was like, well, it really only takes me about 5 to 10 minutes to do this. And so I guess most days I could probably just throw this together for you. And that just kind of put further use and value and everything. And then the competition and the focus and the energy just increased, and everybody was highly motivated. And then if I ever went on vacation, everybody was like, hey, I need my scorecard. Where am I at? And so I recognized the power there. And so really that creates a culture that we all like to be a part of. We're all kind of energizing each other. And so that's important. And so when I'm thinking through the lens of the sales comp design, but also SPM, how we're using it, I'm thinking about those aspects. And then really to get to the territory and go to market piece of this, historically, field people weren't that involved with go-to-market planning and thoughts and territories. And once I started kind of interacting with them, they kind of started pulling me into some of those things. And when I later was working in a corporate role, then I was really touching some of those decisions, and it became a lot more strategic. And instead of like one team thinking about just one piece of it, so if you think about territory, so for us, that's very intense because we operate everywhere, particularly in the U.S. Is if you ever drive down the road, business hours among various stores, you're going to see Pepsi and Frito-Lay trucks and different things all over the place. And it's not uncommon to see, two gas stations on a corner and there's a Frito-Lay truck in each one across the street from each other. And we have to not only balance kind of selling potential, we have to balance the workloads, and they're doing a lot of the fulfillment activities for our customers. And so this gets very intense and difficult, but sales compensation is best when it's holistic and you're thinking end to end, because it really is the last step of your sales strategy, but it should underpin the entire sales strategy because it's where the rubber meets the road. Business becomes people. And so it's very, very important to really have everybody collaborating and working towards the same goal, but thinking end to end and holistic.
That's really good. And I think that to me feels like what a lot of companies would probably hope is the ideal end state. So maybe you have some wisdom or some counsel, because majority of the companies that we speak to and folks in compensation roles and folks in more planning roles, those are functions that are typically operate kind of in their own silos. So as somebody who's been through that process, who's been recognized for the strategic value that you bring, and who has now seen the benefit of all of those things working together, what would you recommend to somebody who is trying to, maybe from the seat of a compensation leader or from the seat of a territory management leader? How would you practically advise somebody to bring those kinds of functions together?
Yeah, it takes time. Number one, it's not going to be an overnight type of thing, and I think it requires a lot of curiosity. I think you have to really show that you're interested in improving here and finding ways to make things better. And I think to try to just sell them on the ideas of the value of this, it's going to be a little ambiguous for them. They're not going to connect the dots. So I think you have to start small and take some bite-sized attempts at starting to move the needle. But ideally, you get to a point where instead of kind of taking the as is and like optimizing bits and pieces, but that you can get it to where, hey, we can actually design an intelligent end-to-end kind of workflow and process across it. And even if you had that opportunity, you're probably not going to do it the best the first time out. And so you have to recognize that this is progress over perfection. Let's learn. And one of the good and bad with sales comp is it's very dynamic and it's changing. And that pace has only increased in the past few years. And so things are always changing. So it enables you to change some of those things. But I would say sales compensation is always an endless problem. And part of the reason we're attracted to this space is we love solving problems. So sales compensation is not for everybody. But the people that love it, they just need to embrace the fact that we'll never 100% make this what we want to be. But it is really about moving the needle, creating new and better value for our businesses, and ultimately creating the win-win. So our business wins, our people win.
Awesome. Well, I want to shift and talk in kind of the last little part of our conversation here about the enablers. We've talked about data. We've talked about technology and tools. AI continues to be a hot topic, where I think we're finally moving from the general idea that AI is compelling to actually finding ways to bring it practically to help enable our salespeople, right? So how do you see these enablers, whether it's AI or data or other things, changing how companies get the most out of their SPM efforts?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot that will change and evolve, and the potential here is just immense. But really, when you're thinking about SPM, it's very, very critical to think about what is the strategy, what is the purpose of SPM, and then really formulate some type of vision associated with it. Because I think a lot of times we want to just start and we create a lot of different blocks, and then we try to put those blocks together, and it's a little clunky. And so we need an architectural drawing essentially of what your vision is, and it needs to have that kind of exterior view, but also a layout view of all the different rooms. The bathroom needs to be in a convenient spot that makes sense. And then you're gonna have to get into the nuts and the bolts and the lumber and the beams and all of that, but you can't start with the nuts and bolts. And so you really have to think about, what do we want to do with SPM? Because that needs to be your anchor when you're getting deep into the weeds of calculations and data, and you're addressing that. It needs to support the overall vision and everything that you're trying to accomplish. And I love AI. I use AI. I think the potential is immense, but it's going to be a while before it is like highly effective and just delivering just untold or unpredictable value. And it's sometimes I think people think it's just a button you push and it's just going to give you exactly what you want, and it's just not that yet. And as sales comp professionals, we know how difficult data is and how poor data can create challenges. And a lot of our jobs, a lot of time, is trying to take very subpar, inferior data, but then do something highly accurate at like 99.9%. And so AI is going to struggle with the same things we struggle with having bad inputs. And so I would really say AI, just think of it as a tool. It is a huge enabler, but it really should be about empowering. And so where SPM is there to kind of support and solve some of the challenges that you have, AI, I think, can play the same role, and they can play a very complementary role. But it's going to take some guiding, some directing, and you're going to have to train AI. And so that's a very different skill that I think a lot of people have. And so that's something people are going to have to ramp up. They're going to have to focus on. But it can be extremely powerful. And I'm more effective. I'm empowered today by AI with the work that I do just about every day. And it's been a game changer for me, but it's going to be incremental. And I approach AI not to automate and eliminate. I'm using it to empower myself. And we need to take that same approach with our sellers, our administrators of sales comp, and everybody that touches sales comp.
That's good. And I love that you use that analogy of the house and the mechanisms of the house and the piping and the systems and all those pieces that need to be put together. We use that the concept of like more of the gearbox, the SPM gearbox, and these interconnected gears that are all working together. And a lot of my career, I've done journey mapping or business process mapping workshop. And when we're talking about kind of getting to that precision of, where does AI or where does data have the greatest value to us? It almost takes that perspective that you were talking about of actually stepping back and going like, we need to understand, what is it we're trying to do here? what are all the things and the business processes that actually fit in that? How do our gears work together? How do these pieces actually, how does our compensation actually relate to the design and effectiveness of our territories and all those pieces? And then you can layer in the AI and your data components as the enablers of those very specific things. To take it with a broad brush and say, we're going to apply AI to everywhere, you're probably not going to get the impact that you want. But to say, we want to look at simulation of our plan models, and we want to actually run Monte Carlo simulations or other kinds of AI-driven simulations tens of thousands of times on these plans to actually look at what the predicted outcomes might be. That's a hyper-specific use case that allows us to go, that's really tangible, it's really practical, and we can make a better decision based on what we're finding and what we're using, right? So I love that idea of just backing up and being really precise in how we use that and bringing that to life.
And we have to take a personal lens with it, because AI is going to recognize patterns and it's going to optimize certain things. And some of those things may not be optimal. And so when I talk about guiding and directing and training, we need to put some guardrails on where AI runs with some of this. And it's going to take some thought and some practice. And but that's again where there should be a overall cohesive vision that's tangible and resonates with the organization, and then figure out what role it plays. And it's probably going to expand and grow over time, without a doubt. But it definitely has immense potential.
Well, John, as we close, I want to have you pull up your crystal ball. What's my final question for you? What's your vision for what the future of SPM looks like, the next few years, the next decade down the road, and how are you preparing your team to gear up for that?
Yeah, so sales compensation, I think, is going to evolve, which is going to require SPM to evolve a little bit. Particularly if you think about the next generation that's entering the workforce. They are completely digitally native. They're used to things being very personalized to them. And they're also used to things being very logical and rational and making sense when it comes to technology and tools. And without a doubt, that's Google, Facebook, all these other great companies that have put tons of development into doing that. And I'm not saying that, SPM is going to have to do that to be effective, but it is going to have to be more human-centric and more personalized. And so each seller may want to look at different stuff. And so instead of a one-size-fits-all dashboard, we're going to have very seller-specific dashboards that they can kind of curate and drive. What do I see? What do I not see? So I think that's a given. But I also think sales compensation, I think this generation is going to expect that the plans are simple, they make sense, they're focused, they really pave a path towards that win-win. And so I think how companies start to leverage SPM more and go beyond calculations, I think is only going to ramp up. And the more people we have that are playing in these areas, the more data we're all going to have and the more feedback we're all going to have. And it's going to drive a lot of positive changes, I would say. And I would just add, there's a big labor market dynamic at play here as well, because I think the best salespeople, it's just only going to become harder to attract and retain. And so sales reps and great sellers are going to be a bigger priority for most companies. And so they're going to invest more, they're going to want more, and rightfully so. And so I'm excited, honestly, to witness the journey.
Hyper-personalization, increased emphasis on the sales force. I love the direction where it's going and really appreciate your perspective today for sure. Any last thoughts, any last insights you want to share with us?
Um, no, I think we covered a lot. This was a great discussion, great dialogue. If anybody is interested in this as I am, definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I post regularly here lately on all things sales comp and SPM, and yeah, would love to connect and share and comment, different insights and experiences that we all have.
John Waldron, Director of Total Rewards and Global Compensation for PepsiCo. Learned a lot from you today, my friend. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks for having me. This was a blast, just like I thought it would be. I had a great time. Thanks.
Me as well. Take care.